I think we have a real treat on our hands here. I don't know how many of you know Jacob Kern, but he's going to join me in a few moments. He's a retired humanitarian crisis manager, and I first met him about a year ago when he came to do a speech at an internal event that we were running at Transporeon. And he absolutely inspired me with the stories that he tells from his career. Now, we think that we are managing supply chains in adversity. Well, you wait until you hear the stories from Jacob, because they are absolutely scintillating. So, Jacob, I'd like you to come and join me on stage. I think I saw you back here. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. I'll leave you with the clicker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Listening to your presentations and your discussions today, I once again realized how important the role you play in everybody's lives every day. Supply chain is like electricity, water, or IT. One only appreciates it when it doesn't work. And I have nothing but respect for your work, because for the last 25 years, I have worked in situations where supply chain did not work, where I really appreciated coming back to Europe and you actually can go in a shop and you buy something and it's there. I will also talk a little bit about my experiences managing teams under high levels of stress, high level of uncertainty, and to a certain extent also under personal danger of being hurt during their work. Again, something that we take for granted working in Europe or the US. The pictures I'm going to show are all mine, and they are scanned from paper. I'm an old man, so forgive the substandard quality. I spent the majority of the last 55 years working on supply chain related jobs and issues, one way or the other. I started as a parcel delivery boy for my grandfather when I was 7 years old. In a way, I was in today's Amazon world, I was DHL and PayPal combined. I collected on a Saturday, I collected parcels with a hand carriage from the factory, and I delivered it to the farms around my village. I got 20 cents a parcel. That made it, in a good day, I made $4. Those were the times. Huh? Later on, as a student, I worked as a truck helper for a company that the old folks around here will probably still remember, that French logistics giant of the 80s. And afterwards, I did a lot of civil engineering jobs in the Himalayas, in Africa, repairing vital transport routes, mostly road construction, in places where people were dependent on their one road they had. And as you see, the challenges were there, but at the time, with technology and with money, you could solve it, so I thought. In the US, I worked at the bottom end of supply chain, which gave me afterwards, when I managed huge supply chain operations, it gave me a good start to talk to the truckers, to talk to the suppliers, to the farmers. And Rob Painter mentioned with pride his application of tracking the trucks. As a truck driver, you don't appreciate that. You don't want to get a call from your boss saying, Jake, where the hell, what are you doing in Laramie, Wyoming, when you're supposed to be in Salt Lake? At the time, I had an excuse. There was a blinding snowstorm. Then my life turned a bit more exciting when I worked for an organization which at the time I hardly knew it existed. What started as a 3-month deployment as a civil engineer to Liberia to repair 200 kilometers of roads for the World Food Programme, or WFP, ended up in 25 years until my retirement a few months ago, working in 10 different roles in this organization. So let me just give you a little bit of a background what WFP is. I will say they or we. I'm still a bit of the separation process. Is it still my organization or is it now somebody else's problem? WFP is the largest humanitarian organization and also the largest United Nations organization with a budget of $14 billion a year. 100% voluntary funded. So in this half an hour I'm talking, somebody will have to fundraise $800,000, 24 hours a day, 365 days. We're supporting 160 million people around the world with 4.8 million tons of food and surprisingly $3.3 billion of cash. So wherever the market exists, we give people cash, $24 to $30 a month. It's not a lot, but with that they can buy food for themselves or prioritize if they need shoes instead of oil, they'll buy shoes. 23,000 employees in 120 country offices. So it's around the globe, but mostly in Africa and Asia. Any given day, there is 40 vessels, bulk and break carriers chartered on the seas, plus a lot of liner container traffic. 100 airplanes. WFP is running the air operations for the entire United Nations in places where no other airplane goes. So any given day, we have 100 airplanes in the air, and that's from helicopter to Dash 8s to A320s, all the way to Antonovs and Hercules for transport. And about 6,000 trucks on the road. As I said, it's one big supply chain organization. And there's a recognition that our work, food security, is tightly linked to stability, political stability. WFP was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. We didn't all get a medal, we just got a pin, but we all got to hold it. And my supply chain problems got more complex. Roads were more like mud holes. Now, this one, where is it? That's the bragging picture, how it looked afterwards. It's the same location in Liberia. Trains exploded with fertilizers. In addition to roads, I had to build airstrips and helipads. And all of the places had one thing in common. They were full of mines, unexploded ordnances, like in Eritrea. They had checkpoints every few kilometers with teenagers pointing an AK-47, Kalashnikov at you. Even so, they knew you every day you were crossing, the same rigmarole. And they had governments that didn't admit there was a train explosion that killed hundreds of people in a city until I showed them a satellite image and say, look, there's a big hole now and it wasn't there 2 days ago. But the problems increased when I took on the next challenge. It was the representative in Syria during the height of the war. Supporting almost 10 million people with daily food rations, that was the easy part. The challenge was supporting 500,000 people in besieged cities. 18 cities were besieged. They were surrounded by the enemy. You starved them till they give up. And of course, they wouldn't let us go and support those people. Another problem was managing sleep because the city was bombed every day. Sometimes it hit very close to the hotel, sometimes the hotel itself. So how do you manage that with 400 staff cramped in a ballroom which was about up to here, this size? 400 people working in an open space office. It's good for collaboration, you mentioned it today. But if you have a problem, everybody will know. And the problems were even worse when we had to go, when we actually got access into besieged areas. So there we go back to supply chain 101, organizing a convoy of 50 trucks with humanitarian aid, food and other items into a besieged area. Once we got access granted by the 10 warring parties that we had to deal with. Once I actually sat for 30 hours with 55 trucks in front of a checkpoint, negotiating access with the commanders. And once they finally let us in, it took us another 7 hours to unload because there's no light, there's no electricity, there's no fuel, so everything has to be unloaded by hand. Another city of 100,000 people was surrounded by ISIS. There was no way to get access by road. And our usual airdrops, which is about 200 meters, where we just dropped the bags out of an Antonov, didn't work because they would shoot at them. So we had to drop from 5 kilometers up into a target zone of about 4 football fields. Each pallet is a ton on parachutes. It was a one-way system. We couldn't recover the parachutes. So out of the 9,000 pallets, we lost only 200. So a 98% success rate on that target. We had a partner on the ground that collected it, but it came at a price, $10,000 a ton delivered. The shippers can only dream of those prices, I guess. Then came the ultimate challenge, the war in Ukraine. As you may remember, it started end of February 2022 on a Friday. On Sunday evening, I got a call from my boss saying, you got to deploy to Ukraine. We need to have a supply chain built up. We need an operation there. We need to support millions of people. On next day, I landed in Poland with my suitcase and 2 staff, and that was it. That was my operation on the first day. It turned out to be the 3 most stressful months of my life, and it probably made me about 10 years older, as you see on that picture. Ukraine is probably the ultimate example of a sudden onset humanitarian crisis. We distinguish 2 reasons why we have humanitarian crisis. One is natural and one is man-made. Natural ones, earthquake, floods, tsunamis. You have an event, a one-time event, you arrive, you assess, and from then on, you pretty much have the same situation. It can only improve. But you don't have a lot of changes in terms of the damages. What you see at the beginning is what you have to work with. So you can plan, you and your staff are relatively safe working, and your plan by and large will work because there's no other external influence. You get to man-made crisis, everything is fluid. You have frontline shifting, you have the people that you want to support are constantly on the move, you don't know where they are. Your beneficiaries, yourself, your staff, your assets, your trucks, your warehouses, your food, your offices, your houses, everything is in danger of being taken over, looted, or bombed, or you have to move because the front line has shifted. Makes it much more complex to work with. And that's what Ukraine was. It was even more complex for several reasons. One is Ukraine was under attack by a superpower. It wasn't just some rebels that were fighting with Kalashnikovs. It was a superpower, and the weapons were not Kalashnikovs and mortars, the weapons were cruise missiles. This superpower happens to be in the board of our executive board, of our directors. So we have the one that is attacking another member, giving us also instructions how we should prioritize in our board of directors of the World Food Programme. We needed to start from scratch. We didn't have any presence. And the expectation was that on day 2 after my arrival, we would deliver food. Now, everybody in this room knows a supply chain has lead times. You can't just go and deliver food from one day to the other to 1 million people. You need to buy it, to ship it, to store it, to distribute, and the whole lot. I got phone calls hourly by our donors and our bosses. What have you done today? How many people have you supported? And yet I was there with 2 or 3 people with a fax machine and a rental car trying to start operating. It is a still war, and it is still, and it was, a war with modern weapons. So the threat is much different than mortars, which you know, it's a luck of the draw whether it just hits your car or not. but the cruise missile does much more damage. So we spent a lot of time in the bunker of the hotel, especially during the night. At least in the first few months, the front lines were changing very fast. And what was moving even faster was the population. Within a month, 12 million people were displaced, were on the move, have left their home. In Syria, it took 10 years of war to reach 12 million people displaced. In Ukraine, it was 1 month. The border was just flooding, but also inside Ukraine, they were moving. So how do you support people that are constantly on the move? You don't know where they are and where you can support them. And the entire thing was happening close to the EU or in the EU. And I don't have to tell you that it's very difficult to move anything within the EU or in or outside the borders. The red tape is just horrendous. At least what we are used to. We are used to bringing a bulk carrier to North Korea, bag it, and distribute it to the entire population. You can't do that in Europe. And the high visibility by the media and by the donors put an extra stress on it. When President Biden, his Secretary of State Blinken, his National Security Advisor Suleiman come to Poland, fly to Poland, and want to hear from me what the challenges are and how they can help, you know there's not much room for mistakes. There is visibility on your operation. So that puts an extra stress to the entire setting up. And again, we were working out of a hotel room as an office. Let me go a little bit into more detail on how we did it. This is what we call the ConOps, the concept of operations. In the first 10 days of arrival, we had more and more staff. The logistics guys, God bless them, first thing, order of business, they developed a concept, how you manage this. We literally started our operations from scratch. We didn't have any presence in any of the countries you see on the map. So we opened 6 country offices, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, and of course in Ukraine. We even had a liaison officer in Moscow to coordinate with the Russians that at least they knew where our warehouses were, they knew when we were moving trucks and people, and we hoped they would respect that and not target us on those. We did not have any national staff presence in anything. So normally when you arrive, you have at least in an earthquake, you have at least staff that are still there, that know the business, they know contractors. Things like a copy machine, it's a problem. And of course, we didn't have any legal presence, legal agreement with any of the countries. So the first order of business was to legalize us. Even the United Nations cannot just go to Poland and start opening business, contracting warehouses, contracting trucks and offices, and start buying food and ship it. So you need an agreement. We needed agreements with all the countries to actually do business. We recruited very few national staff because we didn't know how long it would last, this whole crisis. Plus, there were not too many Ukrainians that you could hire anyway. And so we flew in 300 international staff from all over the world, mostly headquarters and from the regional bureau, not to bleed out other country offices that were already struggling. But you build a team from 0 to 300 in a month, and you don't know any of the 300. It's not that you can recruit them or interview. The only qualification is, can you deploy within 24 hours? And so every day, 10, 15 people would show up in this ballroom and say, okay, I'm here, what do I do? It was quite hectic. But it's WFP, it's a supply chain organization. We do the same type of work all over the world. So when they come to Poland or Ukraine, they knew I'm a procurement officer. I have to go out and find suppliers, and I start that. We had a clear no regrets approach. So, for example, we opened corridors from Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, because we were not sure whether the main corridor we used to go in and out with people and goods in Poland would stay open. We tested it. on all of these countries, we tested a few trucks. We bought food, we sent them across, so everybody knew who we were and we knew how it worked. And then when we saw after 2 or 3 months, we saw we don't need them, we closed the offices again. No regrets approach, don't look back. Sometimes you make decisions that have a high probability that it would be a waste of time later on, but at the beginning, we had an overkill because if the border was closed here, we needed another corridor in and out of Ukraine. There is one difference to most of the other countries we work in. Ukraine has a functioning government and they very much want to be in charge. So we couldn't just go in and start distributing food. Everything had to be in discussion with the government. They wanted to be in control. And the rules and regulation of buying food, distributing food, packaging food, they were all still in place. So the red tape, it was as bad as it was ever there, and that slowed us down in a way. We are used to not having that because in most places like Yemen, Somalia, there's no government, and so we are pretty much free of doing what we want to do. However, the internal supply chain collapsed more or less completely. All the trucks were used for the army efforts. All the men between 18 and 60 were drawn into the army efforts. So shelves were actually empty. And this is the breadbasket of Europe. People couldn't buy food. There wasn't there. So we had to, and factories were struggling either with overproduction because they couldn't export their frozen chicken anymore. And for example, if you're in a frozen chicken business and you have 1 million chicken a month, there's for sure about 10 million eggs and small chicken and middle chicken and older that are in the supply chain. You can't tell them just to turn it off and stop growing. So this poor factory had a lot of input into the factory and couldn't get out on the other side. They couldn't export their chicken anymore. And others couldn't produce because they didn't have any labor anymore. Border crossings were completely overrun. I once counted at this border crossing 1,000 trucks waiting to get out of Ukraine, either empty trucks that wanted to go back or trucks with wheat to export their main export, which is wheat. Waiting for 3 or 4 days to get out of the country, you cannot maintain a supply chain like that. And of course, we couldn't really buy in Europe. In Europe, you can't go to a factory and say, I need 2,000 tons of wheat flour tomorrow. They're saying, okay, come back in 5 months. Our order books are full. Maybe in October, we'll have time to mill it for you. So, and we moved trucks. We moved 20 trucks of food from Turkey, where we have a lot of pre-packaged food. It took 2 months to get through Europe, because nobody's used to us bringing it, and we were not used to the forms that we had to fill out and all of this, because we don't work in Europe. Like in Syria, the food basket had to be adapted. This is a middle-income country. They are not used to baking their own bread and eating peas and lentils and cook them for hours. There was no electricity anymore, no gas. So we had to have pre-cooked food, meaning pasta that didn't need a lot of heating, canned vegetables, canned meat, oil, sugar, coffee, salt. So we decided to buy everything in country. And you see where we sourced vegetable oil, bread and flour, peas. We had warehouse contacts because WFP buys a lot of food in Ukraine for our other operations, bulk food, that we couldn't use inside Ukraine, but we had these contacts, so we rented their warehouses and also packaging facilities. We still have a big packaging facility of DHL in Kiev that we make those family packages, cartons. We opened up offices in Dnipro, in Lviv, and in Kiev. One thing that is a challenge, driving from Lviv to Dnipro, either by train or by car, takes 2 days. Now, Dnipro is quite close to the front line. And if you have 50 staff in there and you want to evacuate them, it takes 2 days to get out. And that's not the safe feeling. We are used to fly people, helicopter or other airplanes, fixed wing. In Ukraine, we couldn't fly, so everything is on road, and that takes a long time to travel. But after 2 months, we managed to support 2 million people, 3 million actually, and we still do that up to today. We had fundraised 800 million within the first few months, and we had 300 staff in the country working out of these offices. And what we also did was, since we didn't have food from the day one, we contacted bakeries, at least the ones that were still working. We said, okay, you produce us 1 million loaves of bread every day, and then we tell the beneficiaries, here's your canned meat and your canned vegetables. The bread you can go and get in the bakery. And that saved us in a way. We could distribute, at least we could distribute bread and please our donors that were on top of us and saying, okay, we distributed 600,000 loaves of bread. Whether it made a lot of sense is a different story, but that was the only way of having some visible results at the beginning. The effects of the war was felt around the globe. I'm sure you had it too, but it hit WFP hard because before the war, we bought 800,000 tons of wheat from the Ukraine for our other operations, which is about half the requirement for wheat. When the war started, that stopped first, and second, the price went through the roof of wheat, went up 25%. That meant for WFP, we had to pay $70 million a year more for the same amount of food that we were buying. And with 70 million, we could have supported 4 million more children and people with food for a year. So that was our effect. Let me close with some personal reflections about questions that I'm being asked when I have this talk. The first one is, how do you lead under a lot of uncertainty? The most important thing is that you stay calm. You have to be the calmest person in the room. When you have an office like this with 300 people under stress, you have to be the calm corner of that office. Take your time to make decisions, but when you do, you communicate them clearly so everybody knows what to do, especially when you don't know the team. It's 300 strangers that you work with. I used to be in Switzerland, I used to be in the avalanche rescue team. And every time an avalanche would bury skiers, we would rush to the scene, and the boss, the crew boss, said, everybody wait. He sat down, he took a pipe out, he smoked a pipe, studied everything, and once he finished the pipe, he stood up and gave us clear instructions, this is how we're going to do it. And by doing that, we had an organized approach, everybody knew what to do, and we probably saved more life than if we just had started right away digging like headless chicken and creating probably more damage than good. Prioritize and adapt continuously. In a fluid situation like this, you constantly have to change your plan, you constantly have to adapt. We did 180 U-turn. Before the war started, we made, of course, our preparations, how we would react when they actually invade. And we said, this is Ukraine. We are not going to bring food to Ukraine. We are not going to buy food and distribute. This is Ukraine. Supermarkets are there. It's the breadbasket. They are produced. They're the 5th largest exporter of wheat. So we are not going to buy food. We give people cash. They can buy food themselves. And the cash assistance you can turn on and off within a day. You decide you give 1 million people $50, you put it on their telephone, and the next day they have it. When we arrived, we realized that's not going to work. So all by a sudden, we ended up with 100% cash operation to 100% food. In the course of the months, we ended up with about 60-40 cash, but at the beginning it was food, 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 food. So you have to adapt, and you have to adapt fast. Give your team clear and achievable goals. In a situation where you don't know the team, where everybody is stressed, the clearer you are in your instructions, the clearer the goals are, the better they work. And be not afraid of making mistakes. I made 100 decisions a day, and I'm sure about 5 or 6 were not good ones. Of course, you can go the safe way and just not decide anything, and you not make any wrong decision, but you're also not making 95 good ones. And take care of your staff and yourself. Look out for burnout syndromes, which brings me to the second question I'm being asked: how can you manage under such high stress? First of all, do not let your own stress influence how you manage your staff. Again, you have to be the calmest person in the room. My role was always to keep the external stress, the media, the interviews, the political things, the telephones, the Bidens of this world, keep that away from the team. They need to do their mostly transactional work in an environment that is very similar to whether they work in Rome or Cairo or at their home, and should not worry about what's going on around them. That's the leader's role. That's your role as a leader. Keep that external stress away. And of course, you're the vacuum cleaner for everybody's problems. Be honest. You have a problem, you tell your boss, and the moment you tell your boss, you feel much better because somewhat he or she knows now, I can sleep, it's somebody else's problem. You have to then make sure that your own dustbin of problems is being emptied once in a while. Otherwise, we all know what happens when a dustbin explodes in a vacuum cleaner. That can be a friend, a mentor, a partner, somebody outside the whole emergency that takes care of your big dustbin that will inevitably come. The biggest compliment I ever got was a staff member that said, "Jakob, you're the only one that when I leave your office, I feel much better than when I entered your office." And that's the role as a manager in a crisis. You have to absorb their stress so they can do their job. What advice do I have for business leaders in light of uncertainties, of maybe recession? Stay focused on what your main priorities are. Leave away the ballast that you can throw overboard. Stay nimble and flexible. Again, in a situation like this, but in everybody's life, you need to make sure that you don't just stay one course, you keep your options open. Listen to ideas, don't assume that your solution is the only one that will work. And keep your team on board. Let them participate in the uncertainties, but give them the assurance that they will not lose the job if it doesn't work. And finally, keep an open mind. The most obvious solution is not always the best solution. So smoke that pipe when you need to. Or like Stefan, I used the quote that you used, begin with the end in mind. Thank you.